Otto Eduard Leopold, Prince of Bismarck, Duke of Lauenburg, known as Otto von Bismarck, was a conservative Prussian statesman who dominated German and European affairs from the 1860s until 1890. In the 1860s he engineered a series of wars that unified the German states, significantly and deliberately excluding Austria into a powerful German empire under Prussian leadership. With that accomplished by 1871, he skillfully used balance of power diplomacy to preserve German hegemony in a Europe which, despite many disputes and war scares, remained at peace. For historian Eric Hobsbawm, it was Bismarck who remained undisputed world champion at the game of multilateral diplomatic chess for almost 20 years after 1871, devoted himself exclusively and successfully to maintaining peace between the powers. In 1862, King Wilhelm I appointed Bismarck as Minister-President of Prussia, a position he would hold until 1890. He provoked 3 short, decisive wars against Denmark, Austria, and France, aligning the smaller German states behind Prussia in its defeat of France. In 1871 he formed the German Empire with himself as Chancellor, while retaining control of Prussia. His diplomacy of realpolitik and powerful rule at home gained him the nickname the Iron Chancellor. German unification and its rapid economic growth was the foundation to his foreign policy. He disliked colonialism but reluctantly built an overseas empire when it was demanded by both elite and mass opinion, juggling a very complex interlocking series of conferences, negotiations and alliances. He used his diplomatic skills to maintain Germany's position and used the balance of power to keep Europe at peace in the 1870s and 1880s. A master of complex politics at home, Bismarck created the first welfare state in the modern world, with the goal of gaining working-class support that might otherwise go to his socialist enemies. In the 1870s he allied himself with the liberals and fought the Catholic Church in what was called the Kulturkampf. He lost that battle as the Catholics responded by forming a powerful centre party and using universal male suffrage to gain a block of seats. Bismarck then reversed himself, ended the Kulturkampf, broke with the liberals, imposed protective tariffs, and formed a political alliance with the Centre Party to fight the socialists. A devout Lutheran, he was loyal to his king, who argued with Bismarck but in the end supported him against the advice of his wife and his heir. While the Reichstag, Germany's parliament, was elected by universal male suffrage, it did not have much control of government policy. Bismarck distrusted democracy and ruled through a strong, well-trained bureaucracy with power in the hands of a traditional Junker elite that consisted of the landed nobility. Under Wilhelm I, Bismarck largely controlled domestic and foreign affairs, until he was removed by the young Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1890. At the age of 75, Bismarck, a Junker himself, was strong-willed, outspoken and sometimes overbearing, but he could also be polite, charming and witty. Occasionally he displayed a violent temper, and he kept his power by melodramatically threatening resignation time and again, which cowed Wilhelm I. He possessed not only a long-term national and international vision but also the short-term ability to juggle complex developments. As the leader of what historians call revolutionary conservatism, Bismarck became a hero to German nationalists. They built many monuments honoring the founder of the new Reich. Many historians praise him as a visionary who was instrumental in uniting Germany and, once that had been accomplished, kept the peace in Europe through adroit diplomacy. A recent biographer of Bismarck wrote that he was, early years. Bismarck was born in Schönhausen, a wealthy family estate situated west of Berlin in the Prussian province of Saxony. His father, Karl Wilhelm Ferdinand von Bismarck, was a Junker estate owner and a former Prussian military officer. His mother, Wilhelmine Louise Mencken, was the well-educated daughter of a senior government official in Berlin. He had two siblings, Bernhard and Malwine. The world saw Bismarck as a typical Prussian Junker, an image that he encouraged by wearing military uniforms. Bismarck was well educated and cosmopolitan with a gift for conversation. In addition to his native German, he was fluent in English, French, Italian, Polish and Russian. Bismarck was educated at Johann Ernst Plaumann's elementary school, and the Friedrich Wilhelm and Grareiskloster secondary schools. From 1832 to 1833, he studied law at the University of Göttingen, where he was a member of the Corps Hannovera, and then enrolled at the University of Berlin. In 1838, while stationed as an army reservist in Greifswald, he studied agriculture at the University of Greifswald. At Göttingen, Bismarck befriended the American student John Lothrop Motley, who later became an eminent historian and diplomat. While remaining close to Bismarck, wrote a novel in 1839, Morden's Hope, or The Memoirs of a Provincial, about life in a German university. In it, he described Bismarck as a reckless and dashing eccentric, but also as an extremely gifted and charming young man. Although Bismarck hoped to become a diplomat, he started his practical training as a lawyer in Aachen and Potsdam, and soon resigned, having first placed his career in jeopardy by taking unauthorized leave to pursue two English girls, first Laura Russell, niece of the Duke of Cleveland, and then Isabella Lorraine Smith, daughter of a wealthy clergyman. He also served in the army for a year and became an officer in the Landwehr, before returning to run the family estates at Schönhausen on his mother's death in his mid-20s. Around age 30, Bismarck formed an intense friendship with Marie von Thadden, newly married to one of his friends. Under her influence, Bismarck became a Pietist Lutheran, and later recorded that at Marie's deathbed he prayed for the first time since his childhood. Bismarck married Marie's cousin, the noblewoman Johanna von Puchheimer at Ortkolsklo on 28 July 1847. The long and happy marriage produced 3 children, Marie, Herbert and Wilhelm. Johanna was a shy, retiring and deeply religious woman, although famed for her sharp tongue in later life, and in his public life. Bismarck was sometimes accompanied by his sister Malwine, Mal Vananum. Bismarck soon adopted his wife's pietism, and he remained a devout Pietist Lutheran for the rest of his life. Early political career. Young politician in 1847, Bismarck, aged 32, was chosen as a representative to the newly created Prussian legislature, the Vereinigte Landtag. There, he gained a reputation as a royalist and reactionary politician with a gift for stinging rhetoric. He openly advocated the idea that the monarch had a divine right to rule. His selection was arranged by the Gerlach brothers, fellow Pietist Lutherans whose ultra-conservative faction was known as the Zeitung, after the newspaper, the Neue Preußische Zeitung, which was so nicknamed because it featured an iron cross on its cover. In March 1848, Prussia faced a revolution, which completely overwhelmed King Frederick William IV. The monarch, though initially inclined to use armed forces to suppress the rebellion, ultimately declined to leave Berlin for the safety of military headquarters at Potsdam. Bismarck later recorded that there had been a rattling of sabers in the scabbards from Prussian officers when they learned that the king would not suppress the revolution by force. He offered numerous concessions to the liberals. He wore the black-red-gold revolutionary colors, promised to promulgate a constitution, agreed that Prussia and other German states should merge into a single nation-state, and appointed a liberal, Ludolf Camphausen, as minister-president. Bismarck had at first tried to rouse the peasants of his estate into an army to march on Berlin in the king's name. He traveled to Berlin in disguise to offer his services, but was instead told to make himself useful by arranging food supplies for the army from his estates in case they were needed. The king's brother, Prince Wilhelm, had fled to England, and Bismarck intrigued with Wilhelm's wife Augusta to place the teenage son Frederick William on the Prussian throne in Frederick William IV's place. Augusta would have none of it, and detested Bismarck thereafter, despite the fact that he later helped restore a working relationship between the king and his brother Wilhelm. Bismarck was not yet a member of the Landtag, the lower house of the new Prussian legislature. The liberal movement perished by the end of 1848 amid internal fighting. Meanwhile, the conservatives regrouped, formed an inner group of advisers, including the Gerlach brothers, known as the Kammeriler, around the king, and retook control of Berlin. Although a constitution was granted, its provisions fell far short of the demands of the revolutionaries. In 1849, Bismarck was elected to the Landtag. At this stage in his career, he opposed the unification of Germany, arguing that Prussia would lose its independence in the process. He accepted his appointment as one of Prussia's representatives at the Erfurt Parliament, an assembly of German states that met to discuss plans for union, but he only did so to oppose that body's proposals more effectively. The parliament failed to bring about unification, for it lacked the support of the two most important German states, Prussia and Austria. In September 1850, after a dispute over Hesse, Prussia was humiliated and forced to back down by Austria in the so-called Punctation of Olmütz, a plan for the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership, proposed by Prussia's Minister-President Radowitz, was also abandoned. In 1851, Frederick William IV appointed Bismarck as Prussia's envoy to the Diet of the German Confederation in Frankfurt. Bismarck gave up his elected seat in the Landtag, but was appointed to the Prussian House of Lords a few years later. In Frankfurt he engaged in a battle of wills with the Austrian representative Count Friedrich von Thun und Hohenstein, insisting on being treated as an equal by petty tactics such as imitating Thun when Thun claimed the privileges of smoking and removing his jacket in meetings. This episode was the background for an altercation in the Frankfurt chamber with Georg von Vink that led to a duel between Bismarck and Vink and Karl von Bodelschwingh as an impartial party, which ended without injury. Bismarck's 8 years in Frankfurt were marked by changes in his political opinions, detailed in the numerous lengthy memoranda, which he sent to his ministerial superiors in Berlin. No longer under the influence of his ultra-conservative Prussian friends, Bismarck became less reactionary and more pragmatic. He became convinced that to countervail Austria's newly restored influence, Prussia would have to ally herself with other German states. As a result, he grew to be more accepting of the notion of a united German nation. He gradually came to believe that he and his fellow conservatives had to take the lead in the drive toward creating a unified nation in order to keep from being eclipsed. He also believed that the middle-class liberals wanted a unified Germany more than they wanted to break the grip of the traditional forces over society. Bismarck also worked to maintain the friendship of Russia and a working relationship with Napoleon III's France, the latter being anathema to his conservative friends, the Gerlachs, but necessarily both to threaten Austria and to prevent France allying itself to Russia. In a famous letter to Leopold von Gerlach, Bismarck wrote that it was foolish to play chess, having first put 16 of the 64 squares out of bounds. This observation became ironic, as after 1871, France indeed became Germany's permanent enemy, and eventually allied with Russia against Germany in the 1890s. Bismarck was alarmed by Prussia's isolation during the Crimean War of the mid-1850s, in which Austria sided with Britain and France against Russia. Prussia was almost not invited to the peace talks in Paris. In the Eastern crisis of the 1870s, fear of a repetition of this turn of events would later be a factor in Bismarck's signing the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary in 1879. Ambassador to Russia and France in October 1857, Frederick William IV suffered a paralyzing stroke, and his brother Wilhelm took over the Prussian government as regent. Wilhelm was initially seen as a moderate ruler, whose friendship with liberal Britain was symbolized by the recent marriage of his son Frederick William to Queen Victoria's eldest daughter. As part of his new course, Wilhelm brought in new ministers, moderate conservatives known as the Wochenblatt after the newspaper. The regent soon replaced Bismarck as envoy in Frankfurt and made him Prussia's ambassador to the Russian Empire. In theory, this was a promotion, as Russia was one of Prussia's two most powerful neighbors. But Bismarck was sidelined from events in Germany and could only watch impotently as France drove Austria out of Lombardy during the Italian War of 1859. Bismarck proposed that Prussia should exploit Austria's weakness to move her frontiers as far south as Lake Constance on the Swiss border. Instead, Prussia mobilized troops in the Rhineland to deter further French advances into Venetia. As a further snub, the regent, who scorned Bismarck as a Landwehrleutnant, had declined to promote him to the rank of Major General, a rank that the ambassador to St. Petersburg was expected to hold. This was an important refusal, as Prussia and Russia were close military allies, whose heads of state often communicated through military contacts rather than diplomatic channels. Bismarck stayed in St. Petersburg for 4 years, during which he almost lost his leg to botched medical treatment and once again met his future adversary, the Russian Prince Gorchakov, who had been the Russian representative in Frankfurt in the early 1850s. The regent also appointed Helmut von Moltke as the new chief of staff of the Prussian army, and Albrecht von Roon as Minister of War with the job of reorganizing the army. Over the next 12 years, Bismarck, Moltke and Roon transformed Prussia. Bismarck would later refer to this period as the most significant of my life. Despite his lengthy stay abroad, Bismarck was not entirely detached from German domestic affairs. He remained well informed due to Roon, with whom Bismarck formed a lasting friendship and political alliance. In May 1862, he was sent to Paris to serve as ambassador to France, and also visited England that summer. These visits enabled him to meet and take the measure of several adversaries: Napoleon III in France, and in Britain, Prime Minister Palmerston, Foreign Secretary Earl Russell, and conservative politician Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli, who would become Prime Minister in the 1870s, later claimed to have said of Bismarck, "Be careful of that man. He means every word he says."